Gentlemen, welcome back to the day three of Industry Samurai Week 2023. We have, as you have seen in the last 2 days, we have some amazing speakers this year, and we have one as wonderful, as eloquent, as informed. You'll be surprised to see the kind of information that this gentleman has is here to share with you. Without further ado, I will first introduce the topic, introduce the speaker, eminent speaker that we have with us. We're going to talk about the electric vehicle ecosystem in the country, which is very much in news. Everybody wants to know more about it. And if so, then you've come to absolutely the right place and the right person. I'm so glad and we are so fortunate to have with us Mr. Pritesh Singh. Hello, Pritesh. How are you doing?
Fine, Anand. Thank you very much for inviting.
Well, it's wonderful. Thank you for taking our time at such a busy uh, part of the year. There are two parts of the year which are the busiest for manufacturers and advisors, and one is end of financial year, and one is the festive season. So, thank you for your valuable time in the midst of the festive season. I'll quickly introduce Mr. Pritesh Singh. He needs no introduction for our readers from across the spectrum. Mr. Pritesh Singh works as a specialist CASE case, which stands for Connected Autonomous Shared Electric and Alternate Powertrains for Nomura Research Institute Consulting and Solutions India Private Limited. He's been working on strategy and operational consulting projects for global automotive OEMs, suppliers, R&D organizations, and governments. Pritesh specializes in CASE, which is CASE, and alternate powertrains, and has spent over a decade on researching various topics related to automotive industry for the Indian and global markets. He's been instrumental in setting up the policy advocacy, ER&D, and alternate powertrain themes for NRI India. Pritesh is a well-known thought leader in the automotive industry, having written over 20 reports and articles in collaboration with associations and leading media outlets. He has also spoken at various webinars and conferences about automotive industry, including Economic Times, ASSOCHAM, PhD, Chamber of Commerce, CVF, REI Expo, the Battery Show India, EV Reporter, and the list is very long. Pritesh Singh has been actively spreading awareness of alternate fuel and powertrains and their role in future amongst the students by taking guest lectures on the alternate powertrains in different institutes such as NMIMS, BITS Pilani, etc. Academics and students who have joined us, please take note. Pritesh, a very warm welcome to you to our show. Pritesh, you have a wonderful presentation for our audience. Please take it over.
Thank you very much, Anand, for a nice introduction. And I'm glad to get this opportunity wherein I'm going to talk about the overall ecosystem of electric mobility. And for that, I have prepared a presentation. So please allow me to share my presentation. Is my screen visible, Anand?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, so the topic which I'm going to talk today is about on the charging into the future, the rise of electric vehicles. So initial 20 to 25 minutes, I'm going to talk about the presentation, and then we can have 10 minutes for the Q&A. For my presentation part, I have kept chapters which includes strengthening electric mobility ecosystem, policy roadmap, current market understanding of EVs, and then I'll switch on talking about the EVs supply chain in India. And in EV supply chain part, I'm mostly going to cover about the batteries, motors, and inverters, as they are the critical components and the most important components and the highest cost contributor for an electric vehicle. And in the end, I'll talk about charging and swapping infrastructure. And before closing my presentation, based on the recent report which we have published with ASSOCHAM, we have some recommendations also for the industry. So let me begin with the need for the alternate powertrains in India. It is a basic question which needs to be answered before I switching towards any kind of alternate powertrains, and then the options which we have around alternate powertrains. So there are three key issues, which are energy security, manufacturing import dependence, and carbon emissions. Mostly we talk about energy security, which is nothing but the oil import dependency, and then the carbon emissions. But one thing generally we miss out is on the import dependency. Despite a lot of development in the automotive component industry, India still imports a lot of raw material and components. And when we switch towards any of the alternate powertrains, including electric mobility, we need to address this issue as well, because eventually this issue has also needs to be addressed. So whether EVs are the EVs are something which can solve this problem, yes, but with certain conditions, that the domestic sources has to be there, the procurement has to be again domestic, and it has to be powered by renewable energy as much as possible. Then it makes more sense in comparison to other alternate powertrains also. Otherwise, we should also think about other alternate powertrains. So now I'll mostly focus upon the electric mobility in India. And in this chapter, I'm going to talk about policy roadmap, including EV national level EV policy as well as the state level EV policy. Let's have a look on the overall policies which Government of India has been implementing at the central level. So unlike any other sector, so there is a general consensus that in India, the policies are not very long term and there is not much clarity. That can be said probably for electrification also, but here you have the thought process has been very clear since beginning, and the policy introductions are also in line with those thought process, what eventually Government of India wants to achieve. Those are two things: local supply chain and local manufacturing. So first scheme which we have is around FAME scheme. So FAME scheme ensures the demand creation and the charging infrastructure development. So the government incentivizes the vehicle purchases. That is how they think of creating the market, and also incentivize the charging infrastructure development. So the idea of FAME scheme is to have vehicles on the road with considerable amount of the infrastructure. Then the second objective, which has to be kept in mind, is localization or the local value add. So for that, government has introduced high import duties, which we call as phased manufacturing program. Initially for critical components, it was 0%, so that India can have some kind of experience to go for the local manufacturing, its own child part manufacturing. And then later it was increased. So this is how at least the assembly level localization is being ensured. But that's not enough. So government has to choose one component or the one part of the vehicle which has the highest value, which obviously without any debate is the battery. So for battery, there is a specific scheme, production linked incentive, and the results are also coming out now. 3 companies have been awarded 30 gigawatt hour of local manufacturing, and the factories are under the setting, they are being set up. And very soon, within a year or 2, you will have the local cell manufacturing also in India. In order to support the further component industry, they have PLI for auto and auto components, in which electric and high technology components are being incentivized. So it's a well thought 3 strategy with 4 initiatives. Moving on, the impact of these schemes, so I will mostly talk about the scheme FAME and FAME 1 and FAME 2, because this is one of the driving force till now for the electric vehicles in India. So in FAME 1, there was limited utilization. So government shifted actually from incentivizing personal vehicles. So personal vehicles were incentivized in FAME 1 to the public vehicles in FAME 2, mostly the taxi segment and the buses. So if you look at the budget utilization for FAME 2, and FAME 2 has a very high budget allocation, which was around 10,000 crores. So out of that, around 38% was utilized till 2022, December 2022, and maximum utilization is expected till the time when the scheme exhausted. So we need to think about the next level of introduction of faster adoption of manufacturing of electric mobility scheme. Now let me briefly talk about the impact of such schemes. Not only in India, but globally, the electric mobility movement is driven by the policy support. I think it is similar to all industries. When they start, they definitely need government support. And in electric vehicle industry, this is far more important to have the support for some I mean, not only for 2-3 years, but a little bit of longer period of time. Because if you look at only on the impact on the two-wheelers, when the subsidy was there till May 2023, the sales numbers were increasing like anything. The moment subsidies were reduced, subsidies were removed, or you can say the target was met. That is how it was not there, and now it is all again there from 15,000 to 10,000, but the sales drop has happened. So this shows the impact of subsidies. Obviously, industry has to sustain without the subsidy, but for some period of time, definitely further subsidies are required. Not only for the vehicle purchase, for the charging infrastructure creation also, government has been coming up with several schemes like no licensing, special electricity tariffs, standardizations, both at central level as well as the state level, including the GST reduction. Now I will move on the state policies. So almost all of the states now have the EV policies, either in draft stage or the final stage. We have done a detailed analysis about which are the top states. So you can see here some states in southern part of India are very high priority. Some are 2-3 states from the North India also tops the rank. The criteria which we followed is a very extensive, and that can be seen on the right-hand side of my presentation. Now let me quickly move towards the market understanding of EVs. Let us have a look on the all kind of vehicle segments, starting from two-wheeler to three-wheeler to four-wheeler and buses. If you look at the data for last 3 years, the increase in sales has been phenomenal, mostly driven by three-wheelers and two-wheelers. But the passenger car is also seeing a lot of momentum. Even the majority of sales is not incentivized. So it seems that unlike two-wheeler and three-wheeler, the growth in passenger car industry is sustained even without the much of the policy support. When I say policy support, it is mostly without much support of incentives, which is the FAME. And in buses also, the numbers are increasing. So let's have look at the nature of the each industry. So in two-wheeler, if you look at, there is a mix of traditional and non-traditional companies, the startup companies. It's all driven by Ola Electric, Okinawa, Hero Electric kind of companies, but there are several startups also in this domain. If I talk about the electric three-wheeler industry, so in three-wheeler, it's mostly e-rickshaws. And in e-rickshaws, there are number of local companies serving limited geographies. So top companies, you see, they are producing e-rickshaws as well as the e-autos, but majority of the startups are there in this game, which goes like in hundreds, are mostly the smaller companies. Those smaller companies are facing challenges in terms of the local supply chain, local procurement. So sometimes it is very difficult for them to meet the regulations, etc. also. So in the three-wheeler industry, what we foresee is further consolidation. In future, we are going to see that limited number of vehicle manufacturers are going to operate, which can upgrade to the quality levels which are demanded by the consumers in the market, as well as the regulatory requirements. Moving on to the passenger cars, which I talked about, not only the local companies like Tata Motors, but now we have global companies like MG, Hyundai, and other even luxury makers are also in this game. So it's not only driven by Tata Motors, Tata and Mahindra, which are the Indian OEMs focusing a lot on the electrification, but also there is a lot of momentum from the global companies. In buses, JBM and Tata Motors are the traditional companies which are operating in this domain, together with the startups like Electra Switch and PMI. And the bigger news is that the cabinet has recently approved 10,000 electric buses for 169 cities, which is going to kind of make a lot of impact on the public transportation, which is greener. So I talked about all positive things, but the picture is not always very, not always 100% good. There are a lot of challenges also, starting from raw material to component manufacturing to financing to charging infrastructure, skill development, and recycling and reuse. Moving on, most of the challenges are around, one of the bigger challenges are around supply chain, which I am going to talk in detail. And I'll cover, as I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, that I'm going to cover mostly topics around batteries, motors, and inverters. So let's have a look on the component localization scenario. So if you remember, I in the beginning talked about one of the very, very important part of the policy making is the localization. India needs to have local manufacturing because it's a new theme and it's a new industry. So there is a chance that we can have our own local manufacturing. Irrespective of anything in any industry, focus has to be there on the localization. So let's have a look on the kind of localization which India has achieved. And the data which I'm showing here is mostly small passenger cars. So if I talk about the battery pack, DC-DC converters, traction motor and controllers, the localization level is very, very low. So for batteries, it's mostly assembly. Cell manufacturing has not even started. So it's around 10 to 20%. For DC-DC converters and traction motors goes even much below than what we expect. There are similar levels in other critical components also, and some of them have some high utilization like AC charging inlets or MCB circuit breaker, wherein Indian industries have the capability. So now let me talk about the batteries. India expects in terms of the battery demand growth, there is like 232.7 gigawatt hour per year capacity requirement by 2030, out of which approximately 129 gigawatt hour per year has to come from the mostly from the electric vehicles. So there is a huge demand which needs to be met by ideally with the local cell manufacturing, but I think in any scenario it is going to be mixed from the local cell manufacturing and the imports. Now let us have a look on the what kind of battery chemistries are there currently. So if you look at India in current situation, mostly is dominated by LFP and NMC chemistry. In buses and in passenger cars, it's LFP, and advanced version of LFP is also now being adopted. In two-wheelers, it's mostly NMC chemistry. Moving on, which battery chemistry is preferable, suitable for India? Let me briefly talk about theoretically. LFP, if you look at the LFP chemistry, the cell cathode constitutes around 21%. At the same time, in NMC chemistry, it goes around 42%. And theoretically, if you look at how much can be localized, so for LFP, it goes around 69 to 90%, and for NMC, it's around 43%. So theoretically, NMC chemistry is more suitable for India, but both the battery chemistries are adopted in the different vehicle segments, as I mentioned. Now, in terms of the raw material content for cathode material, if you look at like LFP as a major chemistry and advanced NMC share increasing in India, nickel and cobalt demand to moderately rise to 15.9 KT and 7 KT respectively by 2030. Moving on to the anode materials, if you look at the graphite requirements, again, is going to rise to 47.6 kilotons by 2030. And there is a higher possibility of localization in anodes in comparison to cathode material. Yeah. So in the distribution of global metal production and processing part, if you look at India, it is like mostly dominated by China, right? And wherever they could not dominate in the metal production part, they have kind of developed the capability in the metal processing distribution. So India also needs to catch up and do a lot of effort, at least to gain the capability around the metal processing distribution part. Now, availability of raw material is again a challenge in India. I think this is known to everyone. In lithium, cobalt, manganese, all kind of material required, especially for making cathodes, are not available in India. So what India is doing, despite the news on the lithium deposits in the country, and if it comes out to be reality, which again going to take almost minimum 5 to 7 years, then India is going to be very well placed in terms of lithium deposits. But for short-term strategy, we have government-led organizations which are either working on G2G collaborations or G2B collaborations to ensure that we have enough raw materials. At the same time, we develop the recycling So whatever raw materials we are importing can be recycled and can be assumed as the local materials going forward. Moving on, let me briefly talk about the lithium ion cell manufacturing plants in India. So if you look at the left-hand side of the chart, no company from India is part of the top 10, 15 companies. But India kind of tries to position, or you can say that aspires to position as one of the countries wherein you will see a lot of manufacturing. And here you can see the companies which have done the announcements. Ola, Reliance, and Rajesh Exports have been awarded PLI scheme, and other larger traditional companies which are into the lead acid manufacturing, as well as the OEMs and component manufacturers are also have announcements in this domain. So in future, it looks like we are going to have some level of cell manufacturing very soon. But for cell manufacturing, the schemes or the target has to be local value addition, not either localization or the local value addition. So for that, we need to have anode, cathode, electrolyte separators as kind of a local manufacturing, which is a very, very big challenge. So if you look at the status of anode manufacturing in India, there are companies, right? Epsilon, HEG, Himadri, they are very well placed and kind of are able to do the anode manufacturing in India, but they are considering something like approval from global battery manufacturing, because demands is lesser in India. Then exports are going to lead their demand, because in India there is no one customer, or there are no group of customers who can kind of feed these demands so that they can do the local manufacturing. And domestic manufacturers definitely are going to be prioritized by companies in India because of the China Plus One policy, as well as cost competitiveness. Moving on, status of cathode manufacturing in India. Announcements are there, but cathode manufacturing at this point in time is not happening. But yes, some developments are there. And companies like these are very active in this domain. But again, the challenges are in terms of lack of clarity on demand, lack of government push and schemes, lack of technical expertise available for raw materials. When I say lack of government push and schemes, the schemes are mostly to incentivize the battery manufacturers, not the cathode manufacturers in India. Similar is the status for electrolyte manufacturing in India. So if you look at the availability of raw materials, salt, solvent, and additives, we are again, some of them are in India, but solvents and additives are mostly not available in India. But yes, across the value chain, some companies are working. So in future, next 5 years at least, we can hope that we are going to have local manufacturing for electrolyte as well. Similar is the status for separator manufacturing. The considerations which I talk about is like long-term demand contracts, raw material supply and impact of cell chemistry, wet versus dry process separators. I'll be talking about motors and inverters in very brief. What I can say is that the motors and inverter manufacturing is also limited. Only 10 to 15% local value addition has happened. But yes, at least for the passenger vehicles, now we have local manufacturers which are working around these. And even in going forward, even for the permanent magnets, for permanent magnet motors, the copper coils, lamination cores can be localized at least in India. Now moving on the charging infrastructure part, 11,000 charging stations, mostly into the Maharashtra, Delhi, and Karnataka. And the number is rapidly increasing. Here, mostly I'm talking about the public charging stations. They are, majority of them are the slow chargers, so we need to catch up on the fast charging part, especially when we have the high voltage systems coming up in India. Swapping is a new scheme, but yes, it's a good market. More than 1 million number of swaps has happened, 10 plus number of companies, and 100 million private investments has happened in India. And there are, global as well as the local players present in this market. Especially three-wheeler can be tapped, and then it can be followed by the two-wheeler also. And use cases are both in two-wheeler and the three-wheeler for the swapping. Let's have a look on the swapping infrastructure. The charging infrastructure, it's a very complex infrastructure. So for any kind of a company, there is a lot of opportunity in terms of CPOs, site providers, utilities, system integrators. So it's kind of developing, and any new player or the traditional player has a lot of opportunity to capture in this domain as well. In terms of way forwards, let me briefly, before I close my presentation, talk about some of the recommendation. So FAME scheme. FAME scheme is a very good scheme, and it has to be continued for 3 to 5 years. That is what we think. In terms of effectiveness of PLI scheme, yes, PLI scheme in current form is also extremely good and should be continued. But the scheme is mostly focusing on the incentivizing the battery companies, not the upstream supply chain like cathode active material or the pre-cam producers, etc. So there is a need to design a scheme to incentivize the upstream also, not only the battery manufacturers. Then the additional policy interventions, the GST benefits has to be there for the swapping, and it has to also come like promoting the processing industry, not only because they drive the investments further. In terms of exports, one very key one which we want to talk about is like investment should be made in R&D and supply chain so that the India-made products become competitive in the other markets also. The other markets are not focused right now, but in future, definitely export has to be captured. In EV financing and priority lending, I think it's a very known fact that government should introduce priority lending for EVs, and the larger banks also should come up. And they have now started coming up also in providing the funding, the financing for the electric vehicles. Then inclusion of MSMEs. We talk about putting a tariff barrier to kind of restrict whatever coming from outside to India. But in our opinion, based on the industry consultations, that these kind of barriers do not work to develop any industry. So there has to be non-tariff barriers only, mainly to improve the quality of the components, not to restrict any kind of components. We can restrict importing bad quality components, but allow the good quality components. So that's all what I have, Anand. Thank you very much. It's all over to you.
Wow, thanks so much, Pritesh. This was very, very detailed and as well as concise. So you've managed a feat that very few people can do, that pack in so much of information, all very useful information into this presentation, which was so easy also to follow and to understand, even for an industry agnostic person like me, or more like an equidistant person like me. Pritesh, I have two questions.
Yes.
We have about 5-6 minutes, or let's say 10 minutes from here. My first question, Pritesh, is purely from market perspective. See, the thing is that it's not only true for India, but for countries the world over, even the biggest adopters of EV, like Norway, for example, that EVs require a top-down approach, whether it's China or other places. My quandary, sorry, has been that we clearly see a lot of demand in India in the three-wheeler, two-wheeler segment. In fact, I come from a part of the country which contributes a lot of people who move out to metros and big cities to drive auto rickshaws and become courier delivery boys. And I have a lot of conversations with them about EV, and I'm so happy to see that people who used to drive fuel guzzling, smoke emitting rickshaws have now taken. But the thing is, they look at this as a purely business endeavor, and they are fine with it. The costing doesn't matter to them. The battery swapping or battery infrastructure doesn't matter to them. All the things that we feel that should be there for EV to succeed, all of that, nothing matters to them. What they feel that this is something that they have got for their livelihood. Point is, there is so much demand in India, then why do we need to push it so much? What is it that we are missing? Whether it is the consumer awareness, they don't know it's having any impact on the environment. They don't care about it. So what is the missing picture? Why we need to have a strictly top-down approach to push EV, and adoption rate still is about 0.5% or something like that, right? Over to you, Pritesh.
Yeah, thank you, Anand, for the question. I think it's very, very important question. So let me first talk about the consumer part. And I think the set of consumers which you are referring are mostly the people who have upgraded from pedal rickshaws to e-rickshaws, mostly. Now, for them, it's a business opportunity. Though they don't they don't actually, and they are not in a position also to think about. Let me be very clear, even the buyers of Audis and the Teslas are also not thinking about much about the environment, etc. It's all that the overall value which vehicle provides. Now this is a very great employment opportunity for the people who can upgrade from pedal rickshaw to e-rickshaw. So if you do the economics, it comes out to be like they can invest in a e-rickshaw, and they can expect a return on investment around 700-800 rupees per day at least, with the kind of business models.
Even for the courier boys also.
Yeah,
they're
that is
also taking it.
correct. That is for the two-wheeler segment. So for three-wheeler segment, these are the buyers. So the buyers are already there. For the two-wheeler in the delivery segment, they are there because it is all making economic sense. So even let me also talk about the e-commerce companies. So definitely they have at global level their targets about emission reductions, etc. But until or unless it makes cost economics for them, it becomes beneficial for them, they are not switching. So beyond 30% of their fleet conversion that is why it's not happening, because maybe beyond that they need to replace their four-wheelers to four-wheeler, not from four-wheelers to three-wheelers. So market is there. Now, if you allow, that has happened also, like in 2010, there was a scheme by Ministry of Renewable Energy, MNRE, and there was a 98 crore subsidy. And the market was there because two-wheeler and three-wheeler buyers were there. So the subsidy was exhausted very soon. But the quality of components, it was all imported. You import and anybody can be an EV manufacturer, right? You just import and assemble these vehicles and it goes in the market. In future, it will become a very big problem because of two things. One, these set of consumers are not going to kind of upgrade to very good quality vehicles, right? And if you import batteries, motors, inverters, everything, one, it becomes a very big challenge. So on those three basic things only, right? It will impact your manufacturing import dependence because you're not localizing anything. It will cause a lot of emissions, even if it goes for the recycling. Emission part also cannot be handled. And then so these two major concerns are not going to be handled. That is why there has to be a strict policy, very well thought, and the long term.
Thanks so much, Pritesh, for that very, very targeted and precise answer, which answers a lot of things that I had in mind. Now, the next question, which a lot of our viewers ask, is that are EVs truly sustainable? So, talking about the overall entire supply chain, especially the energy part.
Right. So, yes, I think this is so are EVs the only option? Or are EVs the only real option? Or are EVs going to be sustainable? There are concerns around this.
Sorry, I couldn't communicate it. So in terms of sustainability, I meant environmental sustainability, that let's say the power grid or the electricity, the battery, the way they are being made. So the mining part is not sustainable and things like that. So people feel that the downstream part looks sustainable, that there is no emission and all. But then the upstream part of the supply chain is where the real pollution and environmental degradation is happening.
Yeah, Anand, really, that's true. So if you talk about the tailpipe emissions, so when we say that EVs are green, we mostly talk about the tailpipe emissions. So there are no tailpipe emissions. But if you look at well-to-wheel emissions, right? Starting from the mining and then refinery, and eventually it comes to your wheel and overall emission levels. And if you calculate well-to-wheel emissions, then it makes sense only when you start reducing your transmission and distribution losses, number one. And then you have more and more renewable energy penetration. So for India case, it makes sense when you go beyond 25% of renewable energy penetration, and maybe you go from current level of 18% transmission and distribution losses to, let's say, 10% or 20% transmission and distribution losses. So this is what numbers talk. But yes, there are other challenges in refinery of refining and the components, etc. So obviously there are challenges. That is why not only electric vehicles are being considered as alternate powertrains, but others also, like pure hybrids, then you have CNG, then you have PHEVs. But for India, it's mostly electric vehicle. So that is first part of my answer. Second part is on the grid infrastructure, right? Whether it is going to make a lot of negative impact and all. So as per the government estimations, I think till they can manage till 25-30% of the penetration without doing much changes. But once we move beyond that, I think there has to be upgradations in transmission lines and all kind of the way we are generating power, etc.
Again, a very thoughtful yet concise answer. I'm loving this conversation, Pritesh. I feel that we should have a lot more of these. Uh, and if you are in or around Bangalore this Friday, we'd love to have you over at this awards event, if possible for you.
Yes.
And in any case, we should be staying in touch and have many more conversations like this. Thank you so much for your valuable time today and the presentation.
Thank you very much, Anand. Thanks for inviting.
Thank you. Thank you for coming here. Have a brilliant day.
Same to you. Have a very nice and successful event. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks. Thanks so much, Pritesh. Take care. Bye-bye.